She found a baby crying in the trash, but the millionaire's reaction left everyone in shock. The night sky was pitch black. Heavy raindrops fell relentlessly, striking against the glass windows of the grand mansions lining the quiet road in the Hamptons. The icy wind cut into the skin like sharp blades. It was a Thursday night no one wished to step outside, except for a young woman finishing her final task of the day. Isabella Torres, 27, adjusted her worn-out coat, frayed at the shoulders. She had just completed her cleaning shift at the luxurious Reed estate, where she worked as a part-time housekeeper. For years, Isabella had survived on jobs like this, scrubbing floors, polishing marble, washing away other people's dust, while carrying her own invisible burden through life. Yet the heaviest weight Isabella carried wasn't the soaked work bag or her muddy shoes. It was the memory carved deep in her heart, the night she had abandoned her younger sister Sophia at an orphanage. She was only 18 then, barely surviving herself. If I can't even feed myself, how could I raise an 8-year-old child? That question haunted her endlessly, especially when night fell. The storm grew harsher. As Isabella walked toward the staff gate, thunder roared across the sky, shaking the ground beneath her. And then, through the violence of wind and rain, she heard something else. Fragile, trembling, yet powerful enough to freeze her breath. A cry. Isabella stopped, straining to listen. The faint sound came from the row of garbage bins near the iron fence. Without hesitation, she ran, rain drenching her to the bone. Her shoes sank into the mud, but the cry urged her forward. She pushed aside the drenched cardboard boxes and froze. A newborn boy lay curled up in a filthy red blanket, skin turning purple from the cold, his umbilical cord freshly cut. "My God," she whispered, trembling. Someone had discarded this innocent life like trash, abandoning him to die in the storm. Isabella dropped to her knees, scooping the baby into her arms, wrapping her thin coat tightly around the fragile body. Miraculously, as soon as he felt her warmth, the baby stopped crying. His fragile breathing blended with her racing heartbeat, binding their fates together in an invisible thread. She knew she should call the police. She knew she should contact the fire department or rush to the nearest hospital. But she also knew this child needed warmth now, needed safety this very moment. And in her mind, only one place appeared: the mansion of Alexander Reed. The rain still poured down as Isabella clutched the fragile child and ran back into the mansion. Her employee key shook in her trembling hands as she unlocked the back door. Warm air wrapped around her and the infant, yet her heart still raced violently. Without thinking, Isabella hurried down the staff corridor, climbing the narrow staircase to the second floor toward one particular door she knew well, the office of Alexander Reed. Standing before the heavy wooden door, she drew a deep breath and knocked hard. "Mr. Reed, I'm sorry to disturb you, but this is urgent." Her voice quivered. Moments later, the door opened. The man appeared in a slightly wrinkled white shirt, his tie loosened after a long day. Alexander Reed, 36, with tousled dark hair and sorrowful blue eyes, well known among his staff. The eyes of a man who had lost everything. "Isabella, what are you still doing here at this hour?" He stopped mid-sentence when his gaze fell on the baby in her arms. Time froze. Isabella tightened her hold on the boy. I found this baby. In the trash bin near the gate. He was freezing. I didn't know what else to do but bring him here." Alexander stood motionless. His expression shifted as if he were staring at a ghost. His eyes welled with tears, his voice breaking. "May I hold him?" Isabella hesitated. Her instinct told her to protect the child, but Alexander's gaze revealed nothing but raw, aching yearning, as if life itself had been placed before him again. She nodded slowly and handed the baby over. Alexander cradled the boy with rare tenderness. His large hands trembled against the tiny, fragile body. Tears slid down his cheeks. "Ah, boy," he whispered to himself. "Yes," Isabella replied softly. "I thought maybe his name could be Gabriel." "Gabriel," Alexander repeated, again and again, as though engraving the name into his heart. A beautiful name, a name of hope. The room grew heavy, yet sacred. In that moment, between a grieving widower and a young woman burdened by guilt, an invisible bond was woven through the innocent child lying between them. "We should call the police," Isabella suggested carefully. "They'll know what to do." But Alexander shook his head, his tear-filled eyes suddenly resolute. "No, not now." Isabella froze. "What do you mean?" "Come with me," Alexander said firmly, carrying Gabriel as if he were treasure. Isabella hesitated, then followed. They stopped before a locked door Isabella had never seen opened. Alexander pulled a key from his pocket, his hand trembling as he turned it. "This room. I haven't entered it since the day Helena died," he murmured, his voice cracking at his wife's name, the woman who had died in childbirth with their son. The door swung open to reveal a space frozen in time, a complete nursery. Pale blue walls, an oak crib, unopened toys, and a rocking chair by the window. Everything prepared, yet never used. Alexander approached the crib and gently laid Gabriel inside, as if placing his own heart there. "This was meant to be my son's room," he whispered. "A medical mistake stole both my wife and child from me. But tonight, this boy appeared like a miracle." Isabella's throat tightened. She knew too well the sting of loss. The scene before her shook her soul. Alexander turned, his eyes fierce yet pleading. "Isabella? What if the baby stayed here, with us?" The question stunned her. "You can't be serious," she gasped. "This is just shock speaking." "No," Alexander interrupted firmly. "I've never been clearer. This child needs a family, and I think I do too." Isabella looked at Gabriel, peacefully asleep in the crib, then back at Alexander. Her answer lodged in her throat, but deep inside, she knew. This was the beginning of something that would change everything. Isabella stood frozen at Alexander's unexpected question, her heart tangled with thoughts, law, responsibility, the future. But then a faint sound from the crib pulled her back to reality. Gabriel stirred, his tiny lips moving, his face scrunching with hunger. Isabella drew a deep breath, steadying herself. "What you just said. We'll think about that later," she whispered. "What matters right now is the baby. He needs to be changed and fed immediately." Alexander looked at her, surprised by the calmness in her voice. He nodded and stepped closer to the crib. "Do you know how?" Gently, Isabella lifted Gabriel to her chest, keeping him warm. "I used to care for my little sister when we were young. Maybe those memories will help me now." She opened the nearby wardrobe, pulling out tiny clothes still with their tags, items prepared years ago but never worn. Her hands trembled, yet moved with quiet determination as she changed Gabriel out of the soiled, damp cloth. She dried his chilled skin and dressed him in fresh clothes. Alexander stood by, silent, watching with a swell of emotion he could not name. Wrapped in warm fabric and a soft blanket, Gabriel stopped crying. His eyelids fluttered, as though comforted at last. Isabella looked up at Alexander. "Now, he needs milk. He needs—" Alexander nodded gently, an unspoken vow rising in his chest. This child would never again know hunger or cold, not while he still breathed. The next morning, pale sunlight filtered through the curtains, illuminating the once-forgotten room. Gabriel slept soundly in the crib, his tiny hands twitching gently, his breathing steady like a lullaby. Isabella sat beside him, dark circles under her eyes from staying up all night, yet her heart strangely at peace. Alexander entered, holding 2 cups of hot coffee. He paused, taking in the sight of the young woman leaning over to adjust the baby's blanket. A warmth he hadn't felt in years stirred within his chest. "He's sleeping peacefully?" he asked. Isabella nodded softly, accepting the cup. "Never did I imagine I'd stay up all night for a child, without a single complaint." Alexander sat down beside her. He was silent for a moment, gathering courage for what he was about to say. Then his eyes met hers, serious, unwavering. "Isabella," he began, "I want to make a proposal, one that could change everything." Her brows furrowed in surprise. "What proposal, sir?" Alexander drew a deep breath, setting his cup down. "I want you to stay here, not just as a housekeeper. I want you to become Gabriel's full-time caregiver. This boy needs a mother, and I believe no one is more suited than you." Isabella froze. Her heart pounded wildly. "You can't be serious. This is an abandoned child. We must follow the law. And me, I'm just an employee." Alexander shook his head. "You're not just an employee. Last night, I saw the way you held him, the way Gabriel found peace in your arms. That isn't something money can buy. That is maternal love." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes, yet she shook her head, her voice trembling. "I can't. I failed once before, when I had to give up my little sister. I don't deserve this." Alexander gently touched her hand. "I failed too. I couldn't save my wife and son. But Gabriel, he's a second chance, not only for me, but for you as well." Silence filled the room. The echo of last night's storm lingered in their minds, but within it a fragile thread of hope shimmered. Isabella whispered, "If I were to agree, what would that mean?" Alexander's response came without hesitation. "You would live here. I would pay you 10 times your current salary. You and Gabriel would never want for anything. I'll handle all the legal matters, hire the best lawyers to make his stay legitimate. All I ask of you is to love and care for him as your own." Isabella stood stunned. $20,000 a month, beyond anything she could have ever dreamed. Yet what struck her most wasn't the money, but Alexander's eyes, the eyes of a man desperate for a family. She looked back at Gabriel. He slept peacefully, lips twitching as if lost in a sweet dream. Isabella whispered, "I agree." The first days at the Reed mansion passed like a chaotic trial, yet filled with unexpected joy. Isabella had never imagined herself waking in the middle of the night to prepare formula, change diapers, or rock a baby to sleep. But when Gabriel cried softly, his tiny sobs awakened something deep inside her heart, a place she thought had been sealed forever. Alexander, the man who once knew only boardrooms and business deals, now learned to mix formula, change diapers, and even hum an awkward lullaby. He devoured thick parenting books, jotting notes as if managing a $1 million project. "You don't have to overdo it," Isabella laughed, watching him spend over 10 minutes choosing pajamas for Gabriel. Alexander frowned slightly. "Each fabric has a different softness. I want to make sure he's as comfortable as possible." "He won't remember the fabric," she replied, cradling Gabriel, "but he'll feel the love of his father. That matters more." At times their differences sparked small arguments. Alexander trusted science and manuals. Isabella trusted instinct and the memories of caring for her younger sister. When Gabriel cried in the middle of the night, Alexander grew restless, analyzing possible reasons, while Isabella simply held the baby close and whispered, "It's all right, my love." Strangely, in her arms, Gabriel always calmed down. Alexander watched, torn between wonder and envy. "He's always peaceful with you," he sighed. Isabella smiled gently. "It's not magic. Babies sense energy. If you're tense, they get anxious too. Breathe slower." Alexander tried, and for the first time in years, he realized he needed to let go of control. Gradually, their teamwork grew seamless. Isabella prepared meals, Alexander played with Gabriel. Isabella changed diapers, Alexander mixed bottles. Ordinary tasks slowly wove into a rhythm, and within that rhythm, the shape of a family began to emerge. There were small moments that stirred their hearts deeply. One afternoon, Gabriel lay on the rug, giggling as Alexander made silly noises. Isabella watched from across the room, her lips curving upward. It wasn't just a man playing with a baby, it was a father reclaiming a missing piece of his heart. On another evening, as Isabella folded tiny clothes, Alexander spoke suddenly. "Thank you for not giving up on me." She paused. "Why would I?" "Because I know I'm difficult, controlling. Helena, my wife, used to complain about that." Isabella lifted her gaze, meeting his. "You're not difficult. You're cautious. And that caution comes from love." Alexander's eyes glistened in the warm light. In that moment, the distance between employer and employee, between a lonely millionaire and a guilt-ridden young woman, began to shrink. Both burst into laughter when Gabriel sneezed, spraying milk all over Alexander. The sound echoed through the once empty halls of the mansion. Isabella realized she wasn't just caring for a child, she was mending a broken heart. That night, Gabriel slept peacefully. The mansion was so quiet that the ticking of the wall clock echoed through the halls. Isabella sat by the window, rocking gently in the chair, her heart heavy with unspoken feelings after a long day. Alexander entered, carrying a blanket. He draped it softly over her shoulders. "You'll catch a chill." "Thank you," Isabella whispered, her eyes fixed on the rain outside. Silence stretched between them. Then she murmured, almost to herself, "There are memories I wish I could forget, but they haunt me still." Alexander sat across from her, his gaze steady. "If you'd like to share, I'm here to listen." Isabella bit her lip, hesitating, then finally let the words escape. "I once had a little sister, Sophia. She was only 8 when our parents died. I was 18, suddenly alone, burdened with survival. I tried. I really did. Working 3 jobs, cleaning houses, selling on the streets, taking shifts. But it wasn't enough. One day, Sophia fainted at school from hunger. Social services intervened. They said I wasn't fit to care for her anymore. They sent her to an orphanage." Her voice cracked. "I promised I'd bring her back one day, but when I finally gained some stability, it was too late. Sophia had already left. She vanished. I never saw her again." Tears streamed down Isabella's cheeks. Alexander listened quietly, never interrupting, only laying his warm hand over hers. "I know that feeling," he said softly. "I lost my family too, though in another way. My wife, Helena, and the son who never breathed. A medical mistake took them both. I thought my life had ended that night as well." Isabella lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes, the eyes of someone carrying a grief she knew too well. "Some nights," Alexander continued, his voice trembling, "I still hear the cries that never came. An emptiness nothing can ever fill." Isabella whispered, "Maybe that's why we're both here, with this abandoned child." Alexander nodded gently. "Perhaps fate wanted us to have a second chance. We can't change the past, but we can choose how to continue the present." 6 months had passed since that stormy night, and the Reed mansion had transformed completely. The once cold hallways now echoed with laughter and baby babbles. Gabriel, with his bright eyes and soft curls, had become the heart of the home. One morning, Isabella was holding Gabriel in the living room, making him giggle, when Alexander entered with his laptop, only to shut it immediately. "You're not going to work?" Isabella asked in surprise. Alexander smiled, shrugging. "Gabriel's going to sit up for the first time today. You think I'd miss that?" She laughed. "A year ago, You never canceled a single meeting." "And now," Alexander stroked Gabriel's curls, "every meeting can wait, but this moment cannot." As they had hoped, Gabriel propped himself up, wobbling before sitting upright for a few seconds, then toppling over. "He did it!" Isabella clapped. "My little genius!" Alexander cheered, lifting his son proudly. Another afternoon, they took Gabriel to the park. When Alexander pointed at the pond and said, "That's a bird," Gabriel babbled back, "Bird! Bird!" Isabella's eyes widened. "Did you hear that? He just said it." "Not only said it," Alexander grinned, "but he understood it too. Brilliant, just like his mother." Isabella blushed, shaking her head. Their new life overflowed with joy and countless bonding moments. At bath time, Gabriel splashed water all over Alexander. Isabella hurried with a towel, dabbing his face. "You're soaked," she laughed, reaching up with the towel to dry his hair. "I don't care," Alexander replied softly. His eyes lingered on her face, so close now that he could feel her breath. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stand still. Then, almost without realizing, he leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss against her cheek. She froze, cheeks flushing. "You shouldn't have done that." "Forgive me," Alexander said quietly. "Sometimes I forget the boundaries because I'm too grateful for you." One quiet evening, after Gabriel had fallen asleep, Alexander suddenly confessed, "You know, I used to think fatherhood meant controlling everything, reading books, following rules. But because of you, I've realized it means being present, being here, right now." Isabella fell silent. "You've changed so much, Alexander." He smiled. "No, I've only just learned how to love, and you're the one who taught me." She lowered her gaze, smiling faintly, her heart racing. Sometimes their moments were interrupted by Gabriel himself. Once, as Alexander seemed ready to say something important, Gabriel squealed and stretched out his arms. Isabella laughed. "Looks like he won't let us stay serious for long." "Maybe not," Alexander said, holding the boy close. "But thanks to him, we've become a family." The news that Alexander Reed was raising an abandoned child with a housemaid soon spread, eventually reaching his relatives. One weekend morning, his uncle Edward, his father's younger brother, arrived at the mansion with his wife Claudia. Isabella held Gabriel tightly in her arms, feeling uneasy under their scrutinizing stares. "Alexander," Edward barked as soon as he entered the hall, "are you trying to make a mockery of this family? The entire city is talking about a Reed bringing home a child from the trash." Alexander stood tall, facing him calmly. "That child has a name, Gabriel, and from now on, he is my son." Claudia lifted her chin, her eyes narrowing at Isabella. "And her? A maid suddenly turned into the mother of a Reed? Do you realize how shameful this is for our name?" Isabella flushed, clutching Gabriel closer, but Alexander raised his hand to stop her. "Enough," he said firmly. "Isabella is not just a maid. She's the woman who has stood by me every night, caring for Gabriel. Without her, neither the child nor I would have survived these past months." Edward slammed his hand against the table. "You're blinded by grief over Helena's death. It hasn't even been 2 years, and you're letting a stranger invade this house." Alexander's brows furrowed, his voice dropping low. "Helena would never want me to live like a shadow. She would want me to find a family again, and today I've found it, with Isabella and Gabriel." Isabella's heart trembled at his words. Claudia scoffed. "We all know she's here for the money, a poor girl suddenly living in a mansion, receiving a lavish salary. What else could it be?" Isabella drew a deep breath, this time refusing to stay silent. "You know nothing about me. If all I cared about was money, I would have left Gabriel in the trash that night and gone on with my work. But I didn't. I stayed because he deserves a family." Edward stepped closer, pointing a finger at Alexander. "If you continue this madness, the family will act. You could lose the company, lose the legacy your father left. Alexander was silent for a few seconds, then declared firmly, "If I must choose between bloodline and family, I choose family. The company can be taken, my reputation tarnished, but I will never lose my son, or the woman who has helped me raise him." His words thundered through the hall, leaving a heavy silence behind. Edward shook his head, his voice harsh with anger. "You will regret this, Alexander." Alexander placed a protective hand on Isabella's shoulder and answered steadily, "The only thing I regret is not finding Gabriel sooner." Edward and Claudia stormed out, their footsteps echoing through the corridor. The air left behind was tense, but clearer than ever, the unshakable resolve of Alexander Reed. Isabella turned to him, eyes glistening. "You just risked everything for me and Gabriel." Alexander smiled faintly, taking her hand. "It's not a risk, it's a choice, and you are my family." 3 weeks after the confrontation with Edward and Claudia, the atmosphere at the Reed mansion had calmed. But deep down, Isabella still felt uneasy. She knew the Reed family would not give up. One rainy afternoon, while Isabella played with Gabriel in the living room, Alexander received an unexpected phone call. His voice grew grim. "Who are you?" "Fine. Meet me in my study." Isabella frowned. "What is it?" Alexander shook his head. "A detective. He says he has crucial information about Gabriel." Minutes later, a thin, bespectacled man entered the study, holding a thick folder. "Mr. Reed," he began, "I was hired by Edward's family to investigate the child's origins. But there are things I believe you should know first." Alexander sat upright, his gaze sharp. "Speak." The detective opened the folder and produced a copy of a birth certificate. "The boy's real name is Gabriel Mura. His biological mother was Sophia Mura, 19 years old, who died during childbirth at St. Benedict Hospital." Alexander froze, while Isabella trembled so violently she almost dropped Gabriel. "Sophia?" she whispered, lips pale. "No. Sophia is my sister." The detective nodded. "We verified it. She passed away that stormy night. The child was recorded as stillborn, but in reality, a hospital worker secretly abandoned him near your mansion, trying to cover up malpractice." Isabella collapsed into a chair, clutching Gabriel to her chest as tears poured down her cheeks. "My sister, she died alone, and I never knew. And Gabriel is my own blood." Alexander was stunned. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice choked. "My God, fate didn't bring him to us by chance." The detective hesitated before adding, "Edward intends to use this information to sue, forcing the boy into foster care. But I felt the truth belonged to you first." Alexander stared at him. "You will keep this secret?" "As long as you wish," the man replied, "but eventually you'll need legal clarity." When he left, the room fell into heavy silence. Isabella buried her face against Alexander's shoulder, sobbing, "I broke my promise to Sophia. I swore I'd find her, protect her, and in the end, she died alone." Alexander wrapped her tightly in his arms. "Isabella, you did all you could. You were just a girl when your parents died. No one can blame you. And Sophia left you her most precious gift, Gabriel." Isabella gazed down at the sleeping boy in her arms. His bright eyes, when open, mirrored Sophia's. "I will never leave him," she whispered. "He's not just my son. He's my chance to make it right for her." Alexander gripped her hand, his eyes unwavering. "We'll fight for him no matter what, against Edward, or the whole world." Isabella lifted her tear-streaked face, now glowing with resolve. "Gabriel is family, and I won't let anyone take him away again." That night, as they laid Gabriel in his crib, Alexander and Isabella stood side by side, their hands entwined. Outside, the rain still fell, echoing the painful beginning. But this time, within the storm, they had each other, and a child carrying the promise of renewal. The following months were anything but easy. Edward kept pressing, sending lawyers to the gates of the estate. Yet inside those stone walls, Alexander, Isabella, and Gabriel lived in a strange, tender peace. One afternoon at the park, Gabriel sat on the grass, clapping and laughing as ducks swam across the pond. Alexander sat beside him, holding his son close. "Say it, Gabriel, duck," he coached, full of hope. "Duck!" Gabriel shouted, making both Alexander and Isabella burst into laughter. "Smart like his father," Alexander said proudly. "And stubborn like his mother?" Isabella teased, her eyes glimmering. In that moment, their gazes met, speaking the words their hearts were too shy to say. When Gabriel's first birthday arrived, the mansion filled with blue and white balloons and the scent of cake. Isabella carried Gabriel to the table, Alexander by her side, his eyes softer than ever. "Make a wish, son," Alexander whispered, helping the boy blow out the candle. Isabella watched them, her heart swelling. For the first time in years, she felt she truly belonged to a family. That evening, after the guests had gone, Alexander led Isabella into the quiet garden. The moonlight bathed the flowers in silver. He stopped, turning to her. "Isabella," his voice was low and warm, "I've lost so much in my life, but because of you and Gabriel, I've learned how to love again, how to live again. And now I don't just want to be a father to our son, I want to be your man." Isabella froze. "What are you saying?" Alexander reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. Inside was an ornate golden ring. "This was my grandmother's," he whispered. "She once told me it should only go to the woman who brings true love into the family. Isabella Mura, will you marry me?" Tears welled in Isabella's eyes. "But your family, the pressure?" Alexander clasped her hand firmly. "My real family is right here in front of me. I need nothing else." Isabella glanced at Gabriel, sleeping peacefully in the nanny's arms nearby. Then she turned back, nodding gently. "Yes, I will." Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms. Their kiss beneath the moonlight sealed the beginning of a new chapter, one that defied opposition, one that promised love above all else. 3 months later, on a bright Saturday morning, the Reed Estate's garden bloomed with white and blue flowers. The air felt crisp, like the promise of a new beginning. Isabella appeared in a simple yet elegant gown, chosen by herself, modest but strikingly graceful. Alexander looked sharp in a deep blue suit, his eyes glowing as he watched her every step. Beside them, 15-month-old Gabriel was the most adorable ring-bearer. Dressed in a tiny suit, he clutched the ring pillow and toddled steadily down the aisle, drawing laughter and applause from the guests. In the front row, Alexander's parents sat in silence. They had once doubted, once opposed, but today, as they saw their son smiling with happiness, their eyes gradually softened. The mother gently held her husband's hand, as if to say, "At last, our son has found peace." And in that moment, all the arguments, all the resistance seemed to fade, replaced by the simple truth that happiness was the only legacy worth protecting. The officiant began, his voice solemn yet warm. "Today we gather to celebrate the love of Alexander and Isabella, and to officially bless the family they have built together with little Gabriel." Turning to Alexander, he asked, "Alexander, do you take Isabella to be your wife, to love and cherish her in joy and sorrow, in health and in sickness?" Holding Isabella's hand, Alexander's voice trembled but was resolute. "I do, and I promise to be the husband you deserve and the father our son needs." The officiant smiled and turned to Isabella. "Isabella, do you take Alexander to be your husband?" "I do," she answered, tears shining. "And I promise to love you, to care for our family, and to fill our home with happiness." When it came time for the rings, Gabriel suddenly bolted around the garden with the pillow, sending ripples of laughter through the ceremony. At last, he delivered the rings to his parents. "Now," the officiant declared, "you are officially a family." Applause and music filled the garden, mingling with joyful laughter. The reception that followed was small, but warm. Marina stood to make a heartfelt toast. Family is not just blood, it's where true love lives. Today, Alexander and Isabella have shown us that truth. Some relatives who had once kept their distance came quietly to shake hands and offer congratulations.